Welcome to dark breathing, where doors close and silence begins. Before you surrender to the feeling of relaxation, if you find a sanctuary in our stories, feel free to support our channel with a like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world are you listening tonight? And what does the hour feel like for you right now? These small details make us a true community. If you'd like to be the main character in one of my upcoming stories, just leave a comment with your name and the role you'd like to play. Do you want to be the hero who saves everyone? The villain? Or perhaps even the devil himself? So, subscribe to the channel and wait for your name in the next story. You'll find only a few ads in the first 15 minutes. Then everything vanishes. After that, nothing will interrupt your journey into calm. I hope you give this experience a chance, for I am certain you won't find stories quite like these anywhere else. Now, dim the bright lights. Let the gentle hum of a water or the whisper of distant rain surround you, and don't let the thunder frighten you. Let's begin the journey. Story 1. In 2005, I was 16 years old when my family moved to a coastal town in Oregon because my dad had started a new job. The move was pretty sudden, and with very few rentals available right away, we had to settle for a 3-bedroom house that needed some work. It was supposed to be a temporary solution until we could find something better. The previous tenants hadn't been very clean, so we spent the first week scrubbing the place down while we were already living in it. I remember my mom saying it felt like the house itself was fighting back against being cleaned. We painted the walls, but stains would keep showing through. No matter how many coats we put on, we eventually just had to live with it, since it was only temporary. As a teenager and a middle child, I spent a lot of time alone in my room. I'd usually lie on my bed at night with my headphones on, just relaxing until I fell asleep. After a while, something weird started happening. I'd be lying there with my eyes closed, and I'd swear I could feel the bed sink down near my feet, like someone had just sat down. At first, I thought it was our family dog, Buddy, jumping up, but whenever I looked, he was never there. I brushed it off, thinking I was just half asleep or imagining things, but it kept happening, and I soon realized Buddy never actually came into my room. None of our pets did. That's when I started to get a little worried. I mentioned it to my mom, downplaying it like it was nothing. But honestly, I felt uneasy. It was this nagging feeling that I wasn't alone. I started sleeping with my curtains wide open, needing the light from the street lamp outside to feel safe enough to sleep. My fears were confirmed one night, an experience I still remember vividly, almost 20 years later. I woke up suddenly, gripped by a terror more intense than anything I've ever felt. I was completely paralyzed. There was a tree outside my window that cast shadows onto my dresser, which was right across from my bed, and I just knew, with absolute certainty, that there was something malevolent standing there among those shadows. I could feel its presence, this overwhelming, evil energy filling the space in front of me. Then I saw it. One of the shadows was moving. It was darker than the others, and moved with a strange intention. The second I focused on it, I knew that was the source of my fear. The only thing I could do was pray in my head. After what felt like an eternity, I could finally move again. I was still too terrified to get out of bed and walk past the dresser to my door. So I hid under the blankets like a little kid, eventually falling asleep as the sun came up. I know what sleep paralysis is, and I'm convinced this wasn't it. The pure dread I felt that night is something I'll never forget. About 2 months later, my parents found a better place. I was scared of my room until the day we moved out, always sleeping with the lights on. After we moved, it was like a weight lifted, and my family finally felt safe, talking about the darkness we'd all felt in that house. My brother, Mark, told us he'd seen a dark figure moving through the hallway near the kitchen. My dad admitted to seeing a dark shape in the corridor right outside my room. But what my mom told me shook me the most. She said that a family friend, Robert, and his wife had stayed in my room once when they visited. The next morning, Robert pulled my mom aside and told her there was something evil in that room. He was known for being sensitive to that kind of thing, and my mom said he was genuinely spooked. When I asked her what exactly he said, she told me he refused to elaborate, saying that if he did, he'd never be able to set foot in there again. Robert passed away a few years later without ever giving any more details. My mom also heard from a neighbor that the couple who moved in after us had a priest come to bless the house. To this day, I'm suspicious of every new place I live. Now that I have my own family, I make a point of cleansing our home with sage regularly. I never ever want to share a home with something that evil again. Story 2. When I was 18 years old, my boyfriend Jake and I were driving down a secluded farm access road in rural Nebraska. It was a dead end, with only one way in or out. This was in late October. It wasn't particularly cold, but the sky was overcast and gray. I had my window rolled down a couple of inches because Jake was smoking a cigarette while we scanned the radio for a decent station. I was sitting, cross-legged, in the passenger seat, leaning back against the door. On both sides of us, the fields were empty and flat, the harvest long since over. I happened to glance out the rear window and saw the silhouettes of 2 men who appeared to be carrying rifles. The moment they saw me looking, they darted to the back of our car and ducked down behind it. I should have heard their footsteps crunching on the gravel, especially with my window open, but there was only silence. I completely lost it. I started frantically locking the car doors and screaming at Jake to start the engine. I never took my eyes off the back of the car. At first, he thought I was messing with him and laughed. but the sheer panic in my voice snapped him into action. I screamed, "There are two guys out there, and I think they have guns." He flipped on the headlights and peeled out, spraying gravel everywhere. I fully expected to see two men in our rearview mirror, shouting and cursing as we sped away. But there was nothing. At the end of the road, Jake stopped and asked me what the hell that was all about. I was trembling so badly I could barely speak, but I managed to tell him what I had seen. He told me he'd been coming to this spot for years with different girls, and nothing strange had ever happened. I suggested maybe it was the farmer with a friend, just trying to scare us off. He said that was impossible. He knew the farmer, and if it had been him, he would have driven down the road in his truck. He lived too far away to be walking across fields at night without a flashlight. I asked if they could have been poachers. Jake said all the land was clearly marked with no hunting signs because houses were scattered along the main road. If they had fired a shot, someone would have heard it and called the police. Besides, he reasoned, why would two armed grown men run and hide from a couple of teenagers in a car? I was badly shaken, and Jake drove me straight home. I turned the event over and over in my mind, trying to find a rational explanation. Jake never saw anything, so he was naturally skeptical of my story. We actually broke up not long after that night. I think I scared him pretty badly. So what did I see? I'll be damned if I know, but I can tell you, I saw it. I'm 63 years old now, and I've never been that terrified before or since. There was something wrong with those figures. They were blacker than the night around them, and unnaturally solid. Yet I couldn't make out any facial features. Their movements were jerky and uncoordinated, but they made no sound at all. I wouldn't even be telling this story if I hadn't stumbled upon similar accounts on the internet over 40 years later. And just for the record, we weren't drinking, smoking weed, or on any kind of drugs. Did I imagine the whole thing? I suppose I could have. But I grew up around here. My friends and I always hung out in the farmlands and foothills, and I never encountered anything like that ever again. Story 3. Last January, I left an abusive relationship and moved in with my friend, Chloe. She lived in a small, upper-level apartment, and it was a tight squeeze with my cat and dog, especially since she has a dog of her own. Next door to her building was a charming, older 3-bedroom house owned by her friend David, who was living overseas. The tenants who had been renting David's house had just bought their own place and moved out. Chloe suggested I stay there for a while, at least until I found my own apartment. I was thrilled and agreed immediately. This way, our dogs could still play together every day, and Chloe and I could remain close. I was grateful for the opportunity and paid David some rent, but his main goal was to help me out and have someone look after the property until he returned in July. I live in a region with harsh, snowy winters, so finding a new place in the summer would be much easier. Chloe did warn me that the house had its quirks, including a creepy basement. She told me that if I ever felt too spooked being there alone, I was always welcome to come back to her place. She had lived in that house for a year before moving to the apartment, so I trusted her judgment. When one of the former tenants first showed me the house, I immediately felt something was off. I tried to dismiss it as a reaction to the unusual layout, the cold drafts, and how dark the back of the house felt. The upstairs had 2 bedrooms with a bathroom in between. The front bedroom was warm and filled with light, but the rest of the upstairs was noticeably colder, almost unnaturally so. Upon entering the back bedroom, I felt a palpable shift. The energy in that room felt strange and heavy, and I had an overwhelming sense that I wasn't welcome there. I know it sounds odd, but I barely glanced inside before closing the door behind me. For the first couple of weeks, nothing major happened, but I never felt truly at ease. I constantly felt like I was being watched. I was jolted awake by what sounded like someone running up the stairs and then slamming the back bedroom door shut. My dog, who was with me, looked startled, ran upstairs, and began growling at the closed door. I quickly went to investigate, but the room was empty. On other nights, I heard footsteps pacing in that back room. Then, while I was taking a bath, my dog would lie in the bathroom doorway and just stare intently down the hall towards that room, sometimes growling or barking. I started coming home to find the door open when I was certain I had closed it. And a few times I found my cat locked inside. Around this time, my bath towel also went missing. I searched the entire house, but couldn't find it anywhere. The situation began to take a real toll on me. I had nightmares every night and would wake up almost without fail between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock a.m. to the sound of my dog whining. The entire house felt heavy, and the feeling of being watched was constant. I finally confided in Chloe. As she admitted, she had also had strange experiences when she lived there. Her bedroom had been the back room, and a couple of times she woke up in a semi-dream state to see a man at the foot of her bed and began talking to him, only to wake up fully and find texts from her roommate asking who she was talking to. She also mentioned seeing things move in her peripheral vision, hearing footsteps, and feeling watched. She told me about one winter morning when she saw footprints in the snow leading from the back door to the middle of the yard, where they just disappeared. Feeling overwhelmed one day, I decided to try talking to the presence. I said, "Listen, I know this is your house. I'm leaving in a few weeks. I've been through a lot of pain recently. Please, just leave me alone." Just let me know you heard me." Instantly, the door upstairs slammed shut. After that, the activity subsided. My nightmares stopped. I began sleeping through the night, and the oppressive feeling lifted. One evening, I was in Chloe's backyard with her and her downstairs neighbor, Ryan, celebrating my new apartment. I went back to the house to grab more drinks and a sweater. As I ran up the stairs, I saw it. At the top of the staircase stood an opaque black silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, but it was as solid and real as a person. I screamed, ran back down, and flipped on the stairway light, only to find the landing empty and the door to the back bedroom standing open. I was immensely relieved when my moving day finally arrived. The peace and quiet in my new apartment was palpable. I went back to the house one last time to do a final check for any belongings I might have left behind. There, in the middle of the floor, in the back bedroom, was my missing bath towel. Still slightly damp, as if it had just been used. I have no idea how it got there or where it had been all that time. One thing is for certain, I have never set foot in that house again. Story 4. I never used to believe in any of this paranormal stuff. I'd watch shows like Ghost Hunters and just laugh at how fake it all seemed. That all changed after I started college. I began my freshman year in 2014 at a small liberal arts college in Oakwood, Tennessee. It was your typical college experience. Meeting new people, having fun, and making memories. One night, while hanging out with friends around 4 a.m., I overheard some guys talking about a supposedly haunted location just a few miles from campus, the former Oakwood Sanatorium. A bit of history. This sanatorium opened in the late 1800s and was known for its brutal treatments, including electroshock therapy. Rumor has it that over 15,000 unmarked graves are scattered across its 1,500-acre property, where patients from all over the region were buried anonymously. A few nights later, my roommate Chris and I decided to check it out. We drove around the vast, abandoned grounds, peering at the decaying buildings that looked frozen in time. After a couple of hours, we headed back to campus, not having seen anything out of the ordinary. A week later, 2 other friends, Ben and David, asked me to take them. David had to work, so Ben and I went alone. We drove around the property again, but as we were leaving around 3 a.m., we passed a cul-de-sac filled with derelict, collapsing houses. From the driver's seat, I noticed a dark, solid outline in the middle of the road, blocking the streetlight behind it. I drove past, thinking it was a bush or a trick of the light. Ben hadn't seen it, so I looped back around. We both stared at the spot, but there was nothing there. I was about to dismiss it as exhaustion when Ben let out a blood-curdling scream. "Go, now!" he yelled. He had finally seen the black outline, and it had suddenly dashed toward our car. I slammed the accelerator, and we sped away, terrified, We drove around for an hour to calm our nerves. As our heart rates finally settled, we saw a disheveled man standing under a streetlight. As we passed him, I saw his eyes were a piercing, unnatural ice blue, unlike any human eyes I'd ever seen. He was an African American man, but these weren't natural blue eyes. They were eerie and unsettling, like something from a horror film. He slowly raised his hand and pointed directly at us, mumbling an unintelligible chant. We were absolutely terrified. We thought that was the end of it. But it was only the beginning. A few weeks later, strange things started happening in Ben and David's dorm room, which was one floor above Chris's and my room. Small items would move on their own. Finally, we rented a cheap camera from the library, set it up in their bathroom with some ping pong balls on the floor, locked the doors, and turned off the AC to eliminate drafts. When we reviewed the footage days later, it was full of unexplained voices and footsteps. The most chilling part was watching the ping pong balls roll out of the bathroom and into David's bedroom by themselves. At that exact moment in the video, Ben and I heard his dresser doors slamming shut and opening from down the hall. I ran to his room to tell him, but it was empty and dark. No one had been there for hours. We tried to ignore it, and things were quiet until the following semester. One night, Ben and I were walking back to his room and heard a vintage baseball broadcast from the early 1900s blaring from David's radio. When I went to turn it off, it cut to silence the moment I entered the empty room. The next year, Chris and I lived in the room directly below Ben and David's old one. For a whole semester, nothing happened. Then, during a snowstorm, David and his girlfriend stayed with us after they lost power. We were playing cards by candlelight when David asked if we had any weird experiences that year. The moment he asked, a loud clink came from the bathroom. Chris found a single spoon lying next to a candle. All our silverware was stored in a closed drawer. To make the same sound, the spoon would have had to be taken out, struck against the glass candle holder, and placed on the counter, all without a single one of us hearing it. As we walked back to the room, a Tupperware container flew off a shelf and hit David in the back of the head. We were so freaked out, we went outside to play in the snow for an hour. After that, doors began closing and locking on their own, right in front of us. During our final week in that dorm, I was sick in bed when Chris, fresh from a shower, came into my room and asked why I had been in his room. I told him I hadn't moved from my bed for over an hour. He turned pale and said, "No, I just saw someone walk from my bedroom into yours, plain as day." We moved out as fast as we could. To this day, we still explore the old sanatorium grounds and have found fields of unmarked graves. We've even captured EVPs there. Once, after I asked if anyone was present, a clear voice on my recorder replied, "You help me." I know skeptics will think I'm making this up, but it's all true. After everything that happened, During those first 2 years of college, my perspective on the paranormal is forever changed. If you're ever in rural Tennessee and have an interest in the supernatural, the old Oakwood Sanatorium is a place you won't forget. Story 5. When I was 19, my friends and I decided to get away from it all for a few days by camping in a remote area. My late grandfather owned a modest cabin in a secluded part of the Appalachian foothills, so I got the keys from my dad. We packed supplies, food, water, and a first aid kit, and headed out. After a long drive, we were dropped off at a trailhead. It was another 45-minute hike before we reached the small, rustic community. It was bigger than I'd imagined, with dogs and chickens roaming freely. As a guy who'd lived in the suburbs his whole life, it was a new experience. We settled into the cabin, spent the first day relaxing, and planned to hike to a scenic spot my dad had told me about. The next morning, we set out at dawn, packing plenty of water. The spot was supposed to be close, so we didn't bring any food. After about 40 minutes of hiking deep into the wooded hills, we found it. A beautiful clearing with a massive, ancient oak tree and a stunning view. But being a group of 5 adventurous teenagers, that wasn't enough. We kept exploring. Without realizing it, we'd wandered for over an hour and a half. We were exhausted and, more importantly, desperately hungry. We decided to head back. We followed the trail, but we never found the big tree again, even after an hour of fast walking. Panic began to set in, and we started jogging. That's when we saw an elderly woman walking along the path. We rushed up to her, said hello, and asked how far we were from the cabin community. She looked at us strangely and said we'd been walking in the opposite direction the whole time, and that it was a 3-hour walk back. We were devastated. 3 of my friends were on the verge of collapse. After we explained our situation, the woman kindly offered to let us rest at her place, which she said was nearby, and have a meal to regain our strength. My friend Kyle and I were hesitant, whispering that following a stranger was a bad idea. But faced with sheer exhaustion, we reluctantly agreed. Her cabin was small and simple, with a neat little garden out front and a goat tethered near the door. It looked perfectly ordinary. Inside, it was surprisingly clean. The furniture was old and worn, but well kept. She told us to sit on some long, backless benches while she prepared food. Kyle and I remained wary, but the others were just relieved to be sitting down. 15 minutes later, she emerged from the kitchen with 2 large platters of roasted chicken and vegetables, a salad, and some bread with olive oil. She poured us tea, and we devoured the food as she went back to prepare more. I had hesitated at first, planning to wait and see if the others were okay. but my hunger overpowered my caution. Kyle, however, didn't touch a thing. He was always the most disciplined one in our group. She brought out 2 more platters, which we finished quickly. She offered more tea and told us to rest and leave whenever we felt ready, then excused herself to her room for a nap. One by one, my friends drifted off to sleep. I set an alarm on my phone for 30 minutes and was the last to fall asleep after talking with Kyle, who said he would stay awake and keep an eye on things. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake by my frantic friends. I snapped awake and saw the terror on their faces. One of them pointed out the window. It took me a second to process it. It was sunrise. My first thought was that we had overslept by a whole day. But the reality was so much worse. Kyle was gone. We ran outside, calling his name, but there was no answer. I went back inside to ask the old woman. I knocked on her bedroom door, but there was no reply. The door was unlocked, so I cautiously stepped inside. That's when full-blown panic seized me. The room was completely empty. There was no bed, no furniture, just 4 bare walls. The kitchen was the same, now utterly vacant. I grabbed my phone to call Kyle, but it was dead. Even though the battery had been at around 70% when I fell asleep, all our phones were dead. We bolted from the cabin and started running down the trail, screaming Kyle's name. After a while, we ran into some men from the community, my grandfather's neighbors. They looked at us with a mixture of shock and fear. Then they dropped a bombshell. "Where have you guys been for the past 3 days?" We were stunned. They told us we had been missing for 3 days. My parents, unable to reach me, had called them, and a search party had been scouring the area for 2 days. We begged for their help to find Kyle. After we told them our story, their faces grew grim. They took us to their local church to speak with the pastor. They believed it was dark magic. The next day, we went back to the spot with a search party, but we searched for hours and found nothing. No cabin, no garden, no trace of Kyle or the old woman. The police took over the case, but they never found any answers. To this day, I don't know what happened. I'm a religious person, but I struggle to accept that the woman was a witch. Even if she was, why only take Kyle? Was it because he didn't eat the food, or because he was snooping around? A part of me wants to go back and uncover the truth. But even thinking about it fills me with a deep, crippling dread. The authorities questioned us extensively, and many people suspected we were involved. But the question remains, where is Kyle, and what happened to him in that cabin that vanished into the woods? Story 6. I've been hunting on my family's property in the Missouri Ozarks my entire life. The place is like a second home to me. I've explored every square inch of it, fished in every creek, and hunted every type of legal game you can find there. So, when I say I'd never experienced anything like this before, understand that these woods are my domain. I'm comfortable there in any weather, at any time of day or night. 2 deer seasons ago, I tooled into the farm around 4:40 in the morning. It was late November, so we were still a good 2 hours from sunrise. I gathered my gear from the truck and headed into the woods. I was carrying my shotgun, a revolver on my hip, A knife, a headlamp, a thermos of coffee, and a backpack with supplies for processing a deer, should I get one. My destination was a tree stand, less than a mile away. But the hike is a tough one. It leads through dense, second-growth forest, down a steep hill, across a swampy bottomland, and then back up another lung-burning ridge. I always dread the climb, but the hunting spot is worth it. I made it down, into the bottom, sloshed through the icy muck, and started the ascent. With my headlamp on, I had to keep turning my whole body to scan the trail, casting moving shadows that gave the woods a real horror movie feel, even on a normal day. A hard frost coated everything, so every step I took came with a loud, unavoidable crunch. This time, however, I noticed something different. There was more noise than just my own. Something else was crunching through the frost close by. I walked about a quarter of the way up the ridge, listening as this other set of footsteps seemed to maintain the exact same distance behind me. My first thought was that my hunting day was about to start early. I couldn't shoot until legal shooting light, but I hoped if I stayed perfectly still, whatever it was might stick around. So I sat down with my back against a tree, turned off my headlamp, unslung my shotgun, and laid it across my knees to wait. The moment I stopped, the other sounds stopped too. Whatever it was must have been spooked when my light swept around as I sat down. I stayed put for about 15 minutes, sipping my coffee in total silence before I decided to move on. I hadn't taken more than 4 steps before the movement started up again right behind me. At this point, I was more annoyed than scared. I stopped again, turned off my light, and quickly sidestepped behind a large tree trunk. Just like before, the forest fell completely silent. After 2 minutes of hearing nothing, I started moving again. So did my friend. This is when the nerves finally set in. I continued up the hill, stopping every so often to listen. Each time I stopped, the other footsteps would continue for a fraction of a second longer than my own. It was as if whatever was out there would see me stop and then try to halt its own movement a moment too late. This happened at least 4 separate times. I was now sweating bullets despite the freezing temperature. I abandoned my thermos next to a tree to free up a hand, so I could hold my flashlight and my revolver at the same time. For the last 100 feet to my stand, I walked backward, facing the direction of the noise, hoping to keep it from moving. I didn't hear a single sound after that. I climbed up into my tree stand and chain smoked about 5 cigarettes in a row. Being up high, concealed by camouflage, finally gave me a sense of security. Still, I only hunted for about an hour after sunrise before packing it in early. I didn't waste any time getting back to the truck. Even in the full light of day, I never told my family about this. I don't think they'd believe me. But when I look back on it, it was genuinely freaky. The timing and nature of the sound felt very deliberate, almost human. And it likely was, since we occasionally get poachers or trespassers on our land. The strangest part is that I never saw a thing, even though the sound was so close. To this day, I have no idea what was following me that morning. Ever since, I've been much more diligent about telling people exactly where I'm going and for how long. If anyone has any idea what it could have been, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Story 7. I've always been a skeptic. I need solid proof to believe in anything, which is why the experience I had 3 years ago completely changed my perspective. I was visiting my uncle in Oregon, and we planned a camping trip deep into a remote part of the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest. The group was me, my uncle Mark, his friend David, and their dog, Bear. Before we left, my uncle mentioned that the specific basin we were heading to had a local reputation for Bigfoot sightings. I just laughed it off. He even showed me a grainy YouTube video of a supposed Sasquatch scream recorded in the same general area, explaining how they're said to knock wood together and vocalize to communicate. I wrote it off as another ridiculous legend, but his serious tone gave me a slight, uneasy feeling. Let me set the scene. If you've never been in the Pacific Northwest wilderness, it's overwhelmingly vast and dense. Our campsite was about a 45-minute drive from the nearest paved mountain road, and then we had to take a boat across a lake to truly isolate ourselves. We were surrounded by massive, uninhabited mountain slopes. On our second night, we decided to take a late-night hike up the mountain. There was no trail, so we followed what looked like a game path. That's when things got strange. Off in the dark distance, we started hearing loud knocks on trees. They didn't sound random. It was almost like a patterned sequence. We paused to listen, but dismissed it as natural forest sounds. As we continued our climb, something else made us freeze in our tracks. From further down the mountain, we heard a blood-curdling howl. It sounded like a woman's scream, but deeper and more guttural. It was incredibly loud, but seemed to come from a skewed direction. I've spent a lot of time outdoors and have heard coyotes, mountain lions, and elk. This was nothing like any of them. It was almost human, but with a raw, beastly tone that instantly reminded me of my uncle's video. Everyone was shocked and visibly scared. Before we could even process it, another identical scream shattered the silence, this time from our left and no more than 100 feet away. We all swung our flashlights toward the sound, shouting in panic, but the forest was so thick we couldn't see a thing. The dog, Bear, completely freaked out and bolted back down the mountain toward our camp. We were worried, but we were close to the summit and trusted he'd find his way back. We made it to the top and started our descent, with my uncle and me a little ahead of the others. Suddenly, a horrific smell hit us. It was a mix of a musty, wet, blanket and the overpowering musk of a primate enclosure at the zoo. It made me gag. As we stopped to whisper about the stench, a huge branch snapped nearby. This wasn't a small twig, it was a deep, thunderous crack, like something massive had stepped on it. I shot my flashlight toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. A huge, blooming creature was walking on two legs, swinging its arms as it moved up the hill through the giant pine trees. My light illuminated the figure. It was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, incredibly bulky and powerful looking. Its head nearly brushed the lower branches of the tall pines. I gasped and stood completely frozen, just staring. It then turned and looked directly at the light. Two large, circular eyes reflected back at us and blinked. It then turned away and lumbered into the thicker brush, disappearing from sight. My uncle and I were speechless. We didn't say a word until we made it back to our campsite, where we were relieved to find Bear waiting for us. As we sat by the fire around 3:30 a.m., we heard the same unearthly howling a few more times in the distance. I can say with absolute certainty that what we saw and heard was not human. That area was completely isolated. As a lifelong skeptic, I never thought I'd believe in a myth like Bigfoot. But believe me, this was no joke. It was a real experience I will never forget. There are millions of acres of unexplored wilderness in this world, and the possibility that a creature like that exists right under our noses isn't so far-fetched. I no longer dismiss these stories out of hand. I know what I saw, and maybe one day you'll have an experience that makes you a believer too. Story 8. Growing up in the 90s, aliens were just a normal part of the cultural landscape. I was immersed in shows and movies like The X-Files, Men in Black, Independence Day, and Animorphs. No one in my family was a dedicated believer, but they had an open-minded attitude, so the idea of extraterrestrial life was never presented as something to fear. I was aware of abduction stories and crop circles, but they felt like distant folklore, not a personal threat. I never considered myself scared of aliens. That changed one morning after a strange incident my mom told me about. I've always been a sleep talker. More of a sleep mumbler, really. But when I was around 8 or 9, I started sleepwalking. My parents would often find me in the hallway or living room, trying to incoherently complete some unknown task. They could usually just guide me back to bed without any trouble, but one night was different. When my mom came to check on me before she went to bed, she found my bed empty. She looked around my room and saw a small figure crouched in the closet. Thinking it was me, she asked what I was doing and moved closer to lead me back to bed. As she approached, I apparently started crying and mumbling about aliens. I was so terrified that I even wet myself on the closet floor. Shocked, she called for my dad. When he arrived and tried to pick me up to comfort me, I began screaming and hit him in the face. Something I had never done before and have never done since. They couldn't calm me down. I just kept crying, mumbling, "The aliens, don't take me. Don't take me again." Over and over, until I eventually wore myself out and let them help me. My mom said she doesn't think I ever truly woke up, because I didn't say a word as she changed my pajamas and tucked me back into bed. The next morning, she asked if I'd had a bad dream about aliens. I had no idea what she was talking about. I had zero memory of the entire event. She asked if being abducted by aliens was something I worried about, and I honestly told her it wasn't. My parents didn't make a big deal out of it. They just wanted to make sure I was okay. I was mostly embarrassed by it. Since I had no memory of the event, I wasn't left with a conscious fear of aliens. Instead, it left me with a deep, burning curiosity about what had really happened that night, and a quiet wonder if they would ever be back. Story 9. I grew up in a very quiet, safe suburb in upstate New York. It's the kind of place where you never really expect anything bad to happen. This incident occurred about 3 years ago when I was 13. I lived in a neighborhood with a lot of green spaces, trails, and parks. Having lived there for years, I felt confident and safe, and my parents were pretty relaxed about letting me go out. It was winter break, and staying inside felt depressing, to be honest. I didn't have a ton of friends, and the ones I did have were often busy or moody. My friend Liam was the exception. He lived a few blocks away, and we would always find ways to entertain ourselves, having snowball fights, messing around, and exploring the neighborhood. One evening, we were at a park across from my apartment complex, which was about a 10-minute walk away. We were doing the kind of dumb stuff you'd expect from 13-year-olds. As it got dark, around 6 p.m., Liam had to head home because of his strict curfew. I didn't want to stay by myself, so I walked back with him. We talked about school and our crushes the whole way. He went his way, and I went to my apartment. About 10 minutes after I got home, I realized I'd left my gloves at the park. I messaged Liam on Snapchat to see if he had them, but he didn't. I figured they were just gone. The next day, my mom was upset with me for losing another pair of gloves. It was a Saturday, and by 5 p.m., I was bored with all my friends busy. I told my mom I was going to Liam's to get my gloves, but I actually headed to the park to see if I could find them. I went to the swings and just sat there for a while, killing time. Before I knew it, it was almost 8:30 p.m. and getting fully dark. I decided to leave. As I was about to go, I noticed 2 people walking into the park. There was only one main path in and out. I didn't think much of it at first, just other people out for a walk. But as I got closer to them, they started staring at me intently. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I stepped off the path to give them a wide berth, and that's when I saw them move off the trail and disappear into some thick bushes. I thought it was weird, but I tried to convince myself they were just a couple looking for privacy. I had to get back on the main path to exit the park. As I passed the spot where they had vanished, I heard muffled voices and the sound of footsteps moving through the dry brush. I didn't look back. I just walked faster, then broke into a run once I was out of the park gates. I felt a little silly for overreacting and decided to stop by a nearby convenience store to calm down. As I walked there, I heard sirens in the distance. I bought a soda, and on my way home, I saw 3 police cars and a canine unit right outside my apartment complex. I went up to an officer and asked what was going on. He initially brushed me off, but when I mentioned I had just been at the park, his demeanor changed. He took down my information and my story. Then he told me they were searching for 2 individuals suspected of attempting to abduct a child. My heart dropped into my stomach. Everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The staring, the hiding in the bushes, the footsteps. They weren't waiting for just anyone. They were waiting for me. To this day, the thought of what could have happened sends chills down my spine. Story 10. When I was about 10 years old, I was selling candy bars for a school fundraiser around my neighborhood. Back then, parents were more relaxed about letting kids go door to door alone, especially in a quiet, safe suburb like ours. I wasn't having much luck that afternoon until I saw a red sedan pull into a driveway a few houses down. Eager for a sale, I ran over to catch the occupants as they got out. There were 3 people: an elderly man, an elderly woman, and a younger woman who appeared to be in her 30s. The elderly couple noticed me immediately and became intensely excited. From a distance, I thought their eyes looked unusually dark, but I chalked it up to the shadows or my imagination. However, a sense of unease settled over me when they began to run toward me with an odd, eager energy. I forced a smile and said, "Hello, would you like to buy some?" But my greeting caught in my throat. As they got within a few feet of me, I saw their eyes clearly. They were completely pitch black, with no whites, no iris, no pupil whatsoever. They were just solid, glossy orbs. Both of them stared down at me with enormous, unsettling smiles plastered on their faces. I was frozen solid with fear. They glanced at each other, and the old woman muttered something to the man that I was too terrified to comprehend. They were both slightly hunched over, bringing their black-eyed faces uncomfortably close to mine. Suddenly, the younger woman rushed up, grabbing each of them by the arm and pulling them back. "I am so sorry," she said to me, her voice full of genuine apology, and she quickly hurried them toward the front door. The moment they were being led away, the spell was broken. I turned and ran, not stopping, until I was almost home. When I finally slowed down, I started to feel guilty. I tried to rationalize it, thinking they must have had some rare medical condition that made their eyes that way, and their childlike behavior seemed to support that. Years later, I tried to research a condition that could explain what I saw, but I found nothing. It wasn't until I was in high school that a friend told me about the legend of black-eyed children. The encounter suddenly took on a much more sinister tone. It raises so many questions. Who were they? Why did they have those eyes? Was the woman their caretaker? And if so, what was she caring for? The experience makes you wonder what strange things exist just beneath the surface of our ordinary world. Story 11. When I was 16, I was having a lot of problems at home with my dad. Looking back, I realize he was a single father just trying his best. But at the time, I felt misunderstood and decided to run away. It was around 11 p.m. on a winter night when I snuck out the back door of our 2-story house. Our town is small, split into 2 sides by a large river with a bridge connecting them. I lived on the west side but was heading east. Instead of crossing the bridge, I decided to take the pedestrian underpass that ran beneath it. This underpass is flanked by a city park and a community center with a playground. The path is lined with tall trees, and that night, a fresh layer of snow covered everything. I was freezing and started to realize how foolish I was to be walking alone on that creepy, isolated path so late. I was about halfway through when the absolute silence of the snow-blanketed park was broken by a sudden, distinct crunching sound. Footsteps. I spun around and saw the shadow of a person cast on the ground, thrown by a nearby streetlight. It was clear someone was hiding behind a large tree. I didn't think. I just ran. I vaulted over the short fence into the community center's playground and whipped around to look back at the park. I saw no one. I didn't hear anyone following me, but my adrenaline was pumping, and I desperately needed to pee. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I relieved myself right there in the playground, my eyes glued to the park, terrified someone would sneak up on me. As soon as I was done, I scanned the area one last time, climbed back over the fence, and sprinted the rest of the way through the underpass. I thank God I heard those footsteps when I did. I have a sickening feeling that if I hadn't, my father would have lost a daughter that night. You see, that area by the underpass, which we locals call Riverside Park, has a dark history. Every few years, someone goes missing or is found in the river downstream, which eventually flows into a large lake. I could have easily been one of them, and no one would have ever known what happened to me. Story 12. About 2 years ago, my wife and I moved to a town with a great reputation for being safe. We wanted to enjoy being young and child-free, so we rented an apartment right in the heart of the downtown district. Our building was above a bustling shopping plaza filled with restaurants, boutiques, and a movie theater. We absolutely loved the energy and always felt completely secure. I'm an avid walker, and since the area is so lively, I've never hesitated to go on walks by myself.
I typically go for a stroll every other day, less often during the colder months. Throughout our 2 years living there, I frequently noticed an older man who would sit on one of the public benches in the plaza. Without fail, he gave me an intensely bad feeling. Whenever I saw him, I would instinctively alter my route to avoid walking directly past him.
I'd often feel a little guilty for being so judgmental. I tell myself, maybe he's just a lonely senior citizen who wants to be around people. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Well, a few nights ago, there was an incident in the plaza. Around 8 p.m., a time I'm never out walking alone, a man kidnapped a woman at gunpoint, assaulted her, and attempted to drive away with her. Her husband actually pursued them and shot at the kidnapper's car. Thankfully, the woman was rescued and the attacker was arrested. The police reported that the man confessed to stalking the shopping plaza for potential victims, specifically watching the women who frequented the area. When I saw his picture in the news, my blood ran cold. It was the same man. I cannot even count how many times our paths had crossed over the past 2 years. I thought about all the times I felt guilty for my unease, and all the times I had been an easy target right in his line of sight. The lesson here is simple, and it's one I'll never forget. Always trust your gut. Always. Story 13. For some context, I'm a man in my late 20s, living in a remote part of Alaska. Last weekend, I received a call from a friend. He'd been on a snowmobile trip, and since my cabin was on his route, he decided to stop by. His voice was tense as he told me it looked like someone had broken in. Every single window was shattered. I was devastated. The cabin is my sanctuary. I immediately went to my shed to load my snowmobile with plywood, heavy-duty tarps, and tools. My plan was a desperate race against the weather to board the place up, hoping to keep the snow and elements out until I could properly replace the windows in the spring. Just as I was about to leave, a cold knot tightened in my stomach. It was a deep gut feeling that something was wrong. I hesitated, then turned back and grabbed my high-powered rifle. Better safe than sorry, I muttered to myself, though I couldn't quite justify why I felt I needed it. As I started the long ride into the woods, I watched the sky grow unnaturally dark. Perfect, I thought. Now a storm on top of everything else. But it wasn't snow that arrived. It was a thick, silent fog that rolled in with startling speed. In minutes, the world shrunk to a small, ghostly circle around me. There are few things more unsettling than being alone in the wilderness, completely encased in a dense, silent fog with no idea what might be lurking just beyond your sight. When I finally reached my cabin, my heart sank. My friend was right. Every window was a gaping hole of jagged glass and splintered frames. I quickly unloaded my gear, the silence of the woods feeling heavy and oppressive. I got to work as fast as I could, the hammer blows echoing unnaturally loud in the muffled quiet. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable primal sensation of being watched. A cold lump formed in my throat. I stopped, straining my ears, peering into the impenetrable wall of white fog surrounding the cabin. Then I heard it, a heavy, deliberate crunching sound, moving through the frozen underbrush. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped my hammer, grabbed my rifle, and pressed my back against the rough wood of the cabin wall, pointing the barrel toward the sound. My first frantic thought was that the vandal had returned, using the fog as cover to finish the job or confront me. But then a more chilling realization dawned on me. No snowmobile had approached. I would have heard its engine for miles in the profound silence. This was something else, something that moved on its own through the trees. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. But the sound didn't come again. Convinced my nerves were just frayed, I forced myself back to work. My movements hurried and frantic. I finished securing the last tarp, loaded my tools back onto the sled, and didn't waste a second getting back on my snowmobile to flee. I hadn't gone more than a mile down the trail when my headlight beam caught on a series of deep, bowl-shaped depressions in the snow. I slowed to a stop, my blood running cold. They weren't potholes. They were massive, fresh polar bear tracks, and they were leading directly back toward my cabin. The creepy feeling of being watched. The noises in the woods. It wasn't a person. It was a polar bear stalking me. It was the culprit who had smashed the windows, likely searching for food. The truth settled over me, more chilling than the Arctic air. I would never have seen it coming in that fog. And my rifle? It would have been little more than a nuisance to an animal of that size, likely only making it more aggressive. I had been a sitting duck, boarding up my cabin while a top predator watched me from just yards away. To this day, the memory fills me with a profound sense of vulnerability. I don't just feel lucky that I escaped. I feel lucky to be alive. Story 14. I genuinely enjoy driving for DoorDash in my spare time. There's something profoundly soothing about being out on the road after midnight, the city lights blurring into streaks of color. Why not make a little money while I'm at it, right? My wife, Sarah, absolutely hates it. She constantly worries about me driving through what she calls the rougher parts of the city in the dead of night. But I've never seen it that way. After months of dashing, I've never once felt my safety was threatened, let alone feared for my life. I actually prefer the routes on the west side, the south side, and through downtown after dark. But let me walk you through my shift tonight. It started out completely ordinary. I logged into the app around 5 p.m. to catch the dinner rush. The orders were surprisingly slow, leading to a lot of idle time parked in lots. By 6 p.m., a strange, unfamiliar restlessness began to crawl under my skin. It wasn't just boredom. It was a jittery, physical need to move.
to get out of the car and just run. My legs wouldn't stop fidgeting. I finally pulled into a gas station, bought a soda and some water, and walked laps around the pavement until the feeling subsided.
7 o'clock p.m. I was on the west side, and the feeling had passed. The orders were steady, the pay was good, and everything felt normal again, except for my driving. I found myself making a series of uncharacteristic, stupid mistakes. I missed simple turns I've taken 100 times. I drove well below the speed limit, earning honks from behind me. At one point, I came to a full and complete stop at a green light, as if it were a stop sign. My mind felt foggy, disconnected from my actions. At 8 p.m., I moved to the south side, and this is when the atmosphere began to shift in a way that's hard to describe. I left the west side with the last vestiges of daylight still coloring the sky. But by the time I crossed into the south side, full darkness had fallen. Now, I drive this route every day. I know how the light fades, but this was different. I was hyper-aware of the encroaching dark. It didn't just arrive, it felt like it actively swallowed the world. And I was acutely, painfully conscious of every second of the transition. The restless anxiety returned with a vengeance, that same primal urge to flee my own vehicle. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the next delivery. While picking up an order from a restaurant, I stepped out into the parking lot and felt it. The darkness had a physical weight to it. It was a deep, heavy pressure, like a low-frequency hum I couldn't hear, but could feel vibrating in my bones. My heart felt like a heavy, straining fist in my chest, and I could have sworn I heard its frantic drumming echoing in my ears. Then came 9 p.m. I accepted an order that took me to a western neighborhood of the South Side, a place I've delivered to hundreds of times without a second thought. I pulled up to the curb, put the car in park, and it hit me like a physical blow. A wave of absolute, unadulterated dread. This wasn't simple fear. It was a soul-deep certainty that something was horribly, terribly wrong. My skin prickled. The cliché is to say I felt watched, but I'm telling you, I would have staked my life on the fact that someone or something was in my back seat, staring at the back of my head. I could feel a presence so tangible it seemed to displace the air, adding a physical weight to the car. I started to tear up, my breath catching in my throat. I have never in my life felt closer to death. Gathering every ounce of courage, I whipped my head around to look. Of course, the seat was empty, but the darkness there wasn't just an absence of light. It was a solid, viscous thing. It felt like I was staring at a person made of pure shadow, their invisible weight pressing down on the suspension. I scrambled out of the car, desperate for fresh air and a reality check. Just then, another car pulled into the house's driveway. Relief washed over me. I could just hand them the order and leave. But they didn't get out. They just sat there, engine off, illuminated by the glow of their phone. I saw them look up at me, then down at their phone, then back at me. They did this 3 times, a silent,
unnerving pantomime. I had no choice. Gripping the food bag, I walked toward the front door. Each step away from my car amplified the sense of horror, as if I were moving further into a predator's territory. I set the order down, snapped the photo with trembling hands, and practically ran back to my car.
I glanced left.
The person in the driveway was still there, their face eerily lit by the phone, and they were staring directly at me, unmoving. I yanked my door open, lunged inside, and hit the lock button. The interior light was on, and I used its blessed illumination to confirm once more. The back seat was empty. But as the door closed, the light began to fade. I watched it dim, and as the final sliver of light vanished, plunging the back seat into blackness, the feeling returned, 10 times heavier than before. It was no longer the feeling of one presence, but of a car full of silent, unseen entities, all their attention focused intently on me.
I was being crushed by the weight of their gaze. I couldn't breathe. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and pulled a hasty U-turn. As I did, I looked back at the driveway. The car was still there, but the driver was gone, vanished. In the 2 seconds it took me to turn around, they had impossibly disappeared from their vehicle. By 9:30 p.m., I was done. I ended my shift and began the drive home, sobbing uncontrollably, driving with all the interior lights on, like a frightened child. The overwhelming horror had subsided, but it left a vacuum in its wake. I felt hollowed out, empty, as if some vital part of me had been scooped out, and all that remained was a cold, silent void. I walked through my front door, and Sarah greeted me, surprised I was home so early. I collapsed into her arms and broke down again. It's now 11 p.m. I'm sitting on my couch with every single light in the house blazing. I feel utterly alone and completely empty, save for one emotion that flickers in that void. A deep, residual fear. Sarah asked me to take the trash out to the dumpster, but I just can't. I don't have a logical reason, but the thought of stepping back into that darkness tonight is utterly unthinkable. I know how all of this must sound, but if anyone has any idea what might have happened to me tonight, please, I need to know, because that fear, it's still here, sitting with me in the light. Story 15. My cousin Leo and I have always been as close as brothers. After not seeing each other for nearly 3 years, he started coming over to my house every single weekend for about 4 months straight. I was thrilled to have him back in my life. This all started about 4 months ago. We were both 17 at the time, and I live in a quiet, peaceful suburb of Portland. Nothing strange or unsettling had ever happened in our neighborhood in all the years I'd lived there, so I never thought twice about going for walks, even late at night. One Friday, around 11 p.m., my parents were having a few friends over. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and loud conversation. The typical stuff. Leo and I were up in my room, getting bored with the video game we were playing. I suggested we go for a walk to clear our heads, something I did often, and he agreed. We set out on what we assumed would be a completely normal stroll through the neighborhood. At the end of my street, you can turn left or right. We went right, and at a roundabout a little further down, I chose the left fork, which leads to a community park with a basketball court. Since Leo didn't know the area, he always let me lead. When we're together, we're usually loud, yelling jokes, messing around, acting like the obnoxious teenagers we were. But as we got closer to the park, I noticed a single figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the basketball court. I immediately shushed Leo. "Hey, quiet down," I whispered, not wanting to disturb someone who was probably just enjoying a late-night game of basketball. But as we drew nearer, we realized how wrong that assumption was. The court was silent. No bouncing ball, no footsteps. The man was wearing a plain white hoodie with the hood up, and he was staring down at the ground, completely motionless. He was so still, he could have been a statue. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath to Leo. I nodded toward a side street that would loop us back toward my house. "Let's go this way." We never took our eyes off him as we carefully changed our route, trying to be as quiet as possible, though our footsteps still seemed deafening in the quiet night. In our nervousness, we weren't watching where we were going. Leo accidentally kicked a pile of scrap wood someone had left on the sidewalk. The sound of clattering wood echoed down the silent street. We both froze. "Shit," I whispered, spinning around to look back at the court. The man hadn't moved a muscle. He remained in the exact same position, facing the ground, indifferent to the racket we'd just made. That's when the feeling of dread became overwhelming. "Screw this," I said to Leo, my voice low. "Let's go home." He quickly agreed. We power walked to the end of the street, rounded the bend, and were almost to the safety of my block when Leo stopped. "Hey," he said, a mischievous look in his eye. "Let's go back and see if he's still there." Against my better judgment, my own curiosity got the better of me. "All right, fine," I said. Instead of retracing our steps, we took the long way around, making a big loop so we could approach the basketball court from a different angle. It only took us a minute to get back to a spot where we could see the court. We both stopped dead in our tracks, exchanging a wide-eyed look of disbelief. The court was empty. "This isn't that weird," I rationalized, my voice shaky. "He probably just lives in one of those houses," and went inside. I asked Leo what he wanted to do, and he said we should keep walking down the main road. The path took us right past the park itself, a large, open field with a playground and clusters of trees. It had no lights, and on a moonless night like this, it was a pit of pure blackness. Leo, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Hey, let's cut through the park. I'm not afraid of the dark." I was about to play along when I saw it. A dark figure was standing behind one of the larger oak trees. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but then I saw it move, a slight, deliberate shift, further behind the trunk, as if hiding. I was seriously creeped out, but I didn't want to panic Leo. I forced a laugh. "Nah, I'm joking, man. Screw that. Let's just stick to the road." We continued up the street, a straight shot that would take about 15 minutes to reach the main road. We tried to diffuse our terror by making more jokes, suggesting the guy was hiding in one of the half-built houses or even in a dumpster we passed. We were laughing, but it was nervous, strained laughter. When we were about 300 meters up the road, a compulsion made me glance over my shoulder. My blood ran cold. Back at the very end of the street, right on the edge of the park, stood the man in the white hoodie. He was facing us, just watching. I'm convinced it was the same figure I saw hiding behind the tree. I quickly turned back around, my heart hammering, and didn't say a word to Leo. I didn't want to send him into a full-blown panic. A minute later, Leo was the one who spoke up. "I don't want to walk any further. Let's turn back." There was no way I was walking back toward that park. Actually, I lied. I need to stop by the convenience store down the road. Let's go that way." He was annoyed, but agreed. The store was, of course, closed, but I pretended to be disappointed. The long, alternate route home took us another 45 minutes. When we finally got back, my parents and their friends were still chatting, completely unaware we had even left. Leo and I went straight to my room, fired up the video game console, and didn't speak about what happened. We went to sleep about an hour later, and his dad picked him up the next morning. But the story doesn't end there. The following weekend, Leo was over again. We found ourselves talking about the man in the white hoodie, and almost as a challenge to our own fear, we decided to go for another walk. I was deeply reluctant, but I agreed. As we approached the basketball court, we saw it was faintly lit by a flickering orange glow. We got closer, and I immediately felt a wave of nausea. "You know, I'm not feeling too well," I said quickly. "Let's go." But before we turned, we both looked in the dead center of the basketball court. A small contained fire was burning. Circled around it were 5 figures, all wearing hoodies pulled up over their heads. They were perfectly still and silent, not talking, not moving, just sitting there staring directly into the flames. Leo and I looked at each other, and without a single word, we turned and got the hell out of there, moving as fast as we could without running. I don't know what they were doing. I don't know if it was connected to the lone man we saw the week before, but I do know that we never went for a late-night walk again. I never told anyone, and as far as I know, neither did he. What still creeps me out the most is that this all happened just a 5-minute walk from my front door.
in a neighborhood that had always felt perfectly safe. We've since moved, but our new house is only a few blocks away from the old one. That guy and those creepy fire watchers are still in the area. So, to the man in the white hoodie and the silent figures around the fire, let's never, ever meet. Story 16. To set the scene, I was 15 years old, visiting my aunt in a rural part of northern Greece for the summer. She lived in a small, isolated apartment complex surrounded by vast, overgrown fields. The nearest sign of civilization was a small convenience store, a 10-minute walk away, and the landscape was dotted with stray dogs and the occasional cat. One afternoon, bored and feeling adventurous, I was exploring the fields near her home when I spotted a small, scrawny cat moving stealthily through the tall grass. My heart went out to it. I approached slowly, crouched down, and made a soft, clicking sound with my tongue, holding out my hand. To my surprise, the cat trotted right over. It had matted, straggly fur and long, unclipped claws, but it was friendly. It sniffed my fingers, gave them a quick lick, and then rolled onto its back, inviting a belly rub. As I petted it, the cat got up and began to trot away, pausing to look back at me as if to say, "Follow me." Its destination was a dilapidated, abandoned farmhouse that looked like it had been forgotten for decades. The door frames were empty, and most of the windows were just gaping holes, though one pane on the left side was still strangely intact. Being a naive and curious teenager, I didn't think twice. I followed the cat right inside. The interior was a wreck, full of dust, debris, and a heavy, stale smell. I could hear a faint, repetitive clunking noise, but dismissed it as the sound of a loose piece of metal tapping in the wind or some insect. I was more focused on the cat, which had disappeared into the shadows of a back room. Then, a voice cut through the silence. It was a single, gruff word I didn't understand. I froze. My mind raced, and the only word I could remember from the little Greek I'd picked up was Yasu, which means hello. Yasu, I said, my voice shaky. Suddenly, a man emerged from a dark corner. He was gaunt and frail-looking, probably in his late 40s, with a wild, greasy beard. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, and that's when I saw it. A dusting of white powder clinging to the hairs around his nostrils and streaked through his beard. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a simple cold. I began to back away slowly, my eyes darting around the room. That's when I saw it, and the image is seared into my memory forever. Lying on the filthy floor near his feet was another cat. It was dead, its body mutilated and nearly skinned, with a large, jagged shard of glass protruding from its stomach. My breath caught in my throat. I was paralyzed with fear, but some stupid, instinctive part of me made me ask, in the calmest voice I could muster, "Saikala, are you okay?" The man just mumbled something incoherent, his eyes glazed and unfocused. That was my cue. I turned to bolt for the doorway, but in my panic, my foot caught on a rotten plank of wood. I stumbled hard, and my phone flew out of my pocket, skittering across the concrete floor. For a split second, my instinct to retrieve my phone overrode my terror. As I bent down to grab it, the man lunged. He slammed my arm down onto the floor, his grip surprisingly strong. His other hand shot out toward the shard of glass sticking out of the dead cat. I didn't think. It was pure, adrenalized reaction. I swung my leg up and kicked him as hard as I could under the jaw. His head snapped back, and he let out a grunt of pain and surprise, releasing my arm. I scrambled to my feet, didn't even bother with my phone, and ran. I screamed at the top of my lungs, bursting out of the farmhouse and sprinting across the fields without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, gasping for air and sobbing. About 5 minutes later, as I was trying to catch my breath, a police van came speeding down the road and skidded to a halt near me. An armed officer jumped out, his weapon drawn. He shouted commands first in Greek, then in Albanian, and finally in clear, forceful English. "Get on the ground, now." I turned to see the frail man, who had apparently been following me at a distance, immediately comply, lying face down in the dirt. The officers swiftly arrested him. Later, the police explained to my aunt and me that the man was a fugitive. He was a known drug addict who had illegally crossed the border from Albania, which explained why he initially spoke a word I didn't understand. The gruesome scene in the farmhouse was a part of his violent, drug-fueled descent to that creepy, greasy, border-crossing, animal-killing junkie. Let's never, ever meet again. Story 17. It began as a whimsical attempt to reconnect with a simpler time. Bored with the endless scroll of digital life, I signed up for ink and anonymity, a service promising the old-fashioned thrill of a mystery pen pal. The website was charmingly rustic, with images of parchment and wax seals. It promised handwritten letters from a stranger who simply loved the art of correspondence. A week later, the first letter arrived. It wasn't in my mailbox. It had been slipped directly through the mail slot in my front door. The envelope was plain, with no stamp or return address. A flicker of unease sparked in my chest, but I brushed it aside, settling onto my couch to open it. The message inside was short, written in a neat but unnervingly deliberate script, as if each letter had been carved onto the page. "I don't need stamps. I'm already close." A nervous laugh escaped me. It was edgy, a bit creepy, but I assumed it was just someone's idea of a memorable introduction. I decided to play along. My reply was light, almost teasing. "That's a creepy way to introduce yourself. Do you mean emotionally close or geographically?" Either way, hello. I mailed it from a box several blocks from my house, a small precaution that already felt silly. 2 days later, a second letter appeared on my hallway floor. You looked confused when you read my note. I liked watching your expression change. My blood ran cold. I had been alone that day. I was certain of it. I rushed to the window, peering through the blinds at the empty street. It was a guess, I told myself. A lucky, disturbing guess. My next reply tried to reclaim some control through humor. Glad you like the show. Do you always watch people read your letters? I instantly regretted sending it. The third letter arrived the next night. I found it slipped under my bedroom door. My hands trembled as I picked up the heavier, cream-colored envelope. The message inside was a mere 7 words. You left your back window unlocked. I didn't go in, just wanted to check. I didn't sleep. I spent the night checking and rechecking every lock, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. In the morning, I reviewed the footage from my driveway security camera. The video glitched for a 5-minute window, the exact time someone could have slipped into my backyard. I installed new deadbolts and powerful motion sensor lights. The letters didn't stop. The next one contained a key. You changed the locks. That's smart. I had to make my own. The metal was warm, as if it had been held in a palm for hours. That was the day I broke. I drove to a friend's house, too ashamed and terrified to explain the full story. The police were politely skeptical. No forced entry, no fingerprints, no tangible evidence. It could be a prank, an officer suggested gently. Maybe a friend with a dark sense of humor. I stayed silent. I hadn't told a soul about the pen pal service. Another letter appeared, this one taped to my bathroom mirror after I returned home. Don't tell them about me. They'll ruin everything. My reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, a stranger. I ripped the note down, shredded it, and flushed the pieces. I immediately deleted my account, wiped my browser history, and tried to erase all traces of my foolish mistake. But the correspondence continued. The letters weren't daily, but they were relentless, arriving just as I began to let my guard down. I found one on my car windshield, another in my gym locker. The most violating was tucked inside a brand new box of cereal. That breakfast choice is terrible, it read, but I don't mind watching you eat it. I threw the entire box into the trash, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I told my boss I needed to work remotely, claiming a family emergency. I changed my phone number, upgraded my security system, and adopted a large protective dog from the shelter. The first night, he barked incessantly at a dark corner of the living room. I sat with him until sunrise, a hammer and flashlight my only companions. The police reiterated their powerlessness. Creepy notes aren't a crime, an officer explained with a tired sigh. I wanted to scream that my entire life had become a crime scene. Then, the letters turned cruel. Your dog has a weak heart. Don't let him stress too much. A visit to the vet confirmed a congenital heart defect. The vet called it an unlucky coincidence. I knew it was a threat. Someone had been close enough to my dog to hear the faint murmur in his breathing. I started seeing things. Shadows darting past windows. Movements in peripheral vision that vanished when I turned. I came home once to find every drawer in my dresser pulled open, my personal life rifled through. No note was left that time. The silence was more terrifying than any message. I fled to my sister's house, begging her not to ask questions. Her home had a top-tier alarm system and nosy neighbors. For 1 week, I breathed easier. Then, I found a letter tucked into my purse after a trip to the grocery store. You're running out of places to hide, but I'll wait. I'm patient. I packed my bags that night. When my sister found me, I finally confessed that I was being stalked. She called the police. This time, they took the note for fingerprint analysis. The results came back. Nothing. No matches. No traces. The paper and ink were utterly generic. It was as if the author was a ghost. I went off the grid. I moved to a studio apartment across town under a different name, changed jobs, and cut my hair. To keep him safe, I left my dog with my parents. For almost a month, there was nothing. I began to hope. Returning from a coffee run one morning, I found a letter taped to the inside of my apartment door. Nice try, but you still smell the same. I dropped my coffee and backed away, calling the police from the locked bathroom, my voice a terrified whisper. They found nothing. No evidence of a break-in. The building's security saw no one. They gently suggested that perhaps, under stress, I had placed the letter there myself. In their bored, pragmatic eyes, I was disappearing. Desperate. I set up a camera to record myself sleeping. The footage from one night showed my bedroom door creaking open at 3:21 a.m. A tall, thin figure, its face obscured by a deep hood, stepped inside. It stood at the foot of my bed, watching me for a full minute before retreating and closing the door. I stopped the video before it ended. I couldn't bear to see more. I vanished again, this time leaving the state without a word to anyone. I told no one my new location. For 2 weeks, it worked. Then, on my first day at a new job, I opened my assigned locker. Inside was a single, square Polaroid. It was a picture of me, asleep, taken from directly above my bed. Scrawled in black marker across the bottom were the words that ended my attempt at a normal life. I still don't need stamps. I quit that day. Using my dwindling savings, I rented a remote cabin in the mountains, a place with no mail service and spotty cell reception. I burned the clothes I was wearing in the photo, bleached my hair, and abandoned my old name. For months, there was only silence. I began to believe I was free. Then one morning, I reached into a kitchen cabinet for a can of beans and found a small, familiar envelope. My hands shook so violently, I could barely tear it open. The message was simple. I liked watching you believe. I packed my car in 20 minutes and fled, driving for hours with no destination. I slept in my car at a well-lit truck stop.
A tap on the window woke me at 3:04 a.m. A man stood there, smiling. He pressed a letter against the glass. "Open it," he mouthed. I shook my head, frozen. He nodded, his smile widening, and then walked off into the darkness. I drove until sunrise. Finally, I opened the letter. "I'll never leave you, not until the very last breath. You signed up for this, remember. Now, I live in a converted storm shelter, deep underground. It's off all official records. There is no address, no internet, no connection to the world above. I see no one. I hear no one. And yet, the letters still find me. I find them in my shoes in the morning. I find them under my pillow at night. Good morning, they say, still thinking of me. I no longer sleep. I doze in minute-long fragments, jolting awake at every imagined sound. I've sealed every crack, lined the hatch with makeshift alarms of string and tin cans. But it doesn't matter. A new letter was waiting for me this morning, tucked into the folds of a clean towel. "You forget," it read. "I pay attention." The cup of tea, my favorite blend, sitting on the table when I emerged from the crawl space, was the final proof. He is not outside. He is not a threat I can lock out. He is here. He has always been here. And I am no longer a person living a life. I am a character in a story he is writing. One terrifying letter at a time, waiting for the final sentence to be written. Story 18. It began on a Monday, with a sound so faint I almost mistook it for a dream. At 3:02 a.m., I was jolted awake by the soft, metallic jiggling of my front door handle. It wasn't a violent shake, but a slow, deliberate testing, as if someone was carefully checking the lock. I lay frozen in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening, until the sound stopped and an unnerving silence fell over my apartment. I convinced myself it was the wind or my imagination, but it happened again on Tuesday. At 3:01 a.m. on the dot, the jiggling returned. This time, I was already awake. I grabbed my phone, my breath caught in my throat, and pulled up the live feed from the camera mounted above my front door. The screen showed my empty porch, the welcome mat, and my wilting fern, perfectly still. There was no one there. Wednesday. Fear had curdled into a determined dread. I waited in the dark, a baseball bat leaning against my nightstand. The moment the handle began to move, I crept into the hallway, phone in hand. The live feed still showed nothing. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door, and the jiggling ceased instantly, as if the presence on the other side had sensed me. On Thursday, I called the building manager. He sounded bored, suggesting the old building's doors sometimes swelled with the night's humidity. I didn't believe him. That night, I sprinkled a fine layer of baking soda across the entire inside threshold and down the hallway. I needed physical proof. At 3:03 a.m., the handle jiggled, this time with a slower, more cautious rhythm. At dawn, I inspected the floor. The powder was pristine, without a single smudge or footprint.
my sanity began to fray. On Friday, I mounted a second camera inside my apartment, pointing directly at the door, synced to a motion alert. At 3:04 a.m., my phone chimed. The handle was jiggling in the live feed, but the recorded footage showed a perfectly still door handle. There was no movement, no sound on the recording, only the silent, terrifying evidence that my eyes were lying to me. I called the police on Saturday. Officer Peters, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, took a report. He suggested a prankster or a technical glitch. "Get a better lock," he said. "Maybe a dog." I showed him the conflicting footage, but he just shrugged.
That night, I sat on the floor in my dark hallway, a kitchen knife in my sweaty palm, staring at the door. At 3:05 a.m., the knob didn't just jiggle, it turned. It rotated with a slow, grinding purpose. I lunged, yanking the door open with a shout, ready to confront my tormentor. The hallway was empty. The motion sensor light flicked on a second later, illuminating nothing. I slammed the door shut, my whole body trembling. Back at my computer, I reviewed the footage from both cameras. The exterior camera showed nothing. The interior camera showed the door handle turning on its own. But then I saw it. The timestamps were out of sync by 19 seconds. The interior camera was ahead. The handle was moving before any possible external force could be applied. I fled to a friend's apartment on Sunday, leaving the cameras running. At 3:20 a.m., my phone buzzed. The notification was for motion inside my living room. I opened the app with shaking hands. The grainy footage showed my dark living room. Then, for a single frame, a dark smudge, a shadow, manifested near my coffee table. It glided toward the door and vanished. 3 seconds later, the door handle jiggled. I returned on Monday morning to a silent, normal-looking apartment. Everything was in its place, but the air smelled faintly of rust and stagnant pond water. The scent clung to the curtains and the carpets, refusing to dissipate. That night, I dissected all the previous footage, frame by frame, and there it was, in nearly every clip. A fleeting, grayish blur in the background, always moving toward the door, just before the handle moved. It had been there all along. I stopped sleeping. I kept all the lights on. I turned the cameras off. They were useless. I resorted to a child's solution, taping a string to the door handle with a small jingle bell on the end. At 3:01 a.m. on Tuesday, the bell jingled softly from the hallway. I didn't move. I just stared into the darkness, paralyzed. On Wednesday morning, I found the bell on the floor. The string hadn't broken. It had been sliced cleanly, as if with scissors. I packed a bag, booked a hotel room, and vowed to break my lease. But before I left my old life for good, I took one last, long look at the Sunday footage. I zoomed in on the dark reflection in my television screen. I enhanced the image, sharpening the contrast. And there it was. Reflected in the glass was a tall, gaunt figure standing in the middle of my living room. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and it was watching the door. It was watching me. I moved to a new city, into a modern apartment with bright lights and new locks. I told no one my address. For a few weeks, there was peace. Then, last Tuesday, I found it on my new welcome mat. A single jingle bell, tied to a piece of red string that had been cut cleanly at the end. My blood turned to ice. I snatched it up, slammed the door, and engaged all 3 deadbolts. I threw the bell into the kitchen trash can, burying it under refuse. But the next morning, the entire trash bag was gone, replaced by a fresh, clean liner I had not put there. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair and stacked a tower of pots and pans on it. I taped another bell to the handle. I did not sleep. I sat in bed, every light blazing, and waited. At 3:19 a.m., the tower of pans clattered to the floor. I ran to the door. It was still locked, the chair still in place, the bell still taped. But the air in the hallway was frigid, and my breath plumed in a white cloud. And then I saw it, not on a screen, but with my own eyes. A long, distorted shadow detached itself from the wall and slid along the surface, moving with a liquid grace that defied physics. It was inside the wall itself. The lights flickered. The shadow was gone. And then the bell I had taped to the inside handle began to ring, a cheerful, tinny jingle that echoed in the silent, locked apartment. The handle itself never moved. I understand now. It doesn't follow me through space. It converges with me in time. Wherever I am, at 3:01 a.m., it is there too. It is not bound by locks or doors. It is a part of the night itself, and it has my address etched into its very being. The bell continues to ring softly in the other room, a sound I know I will hear every night for the rest of my life. Story 19. The weight of a 12-hour shift settled deep into my bones as I finally pushed open the door to my apartment. The silence that greeted me was a physical relief, and I collapsed onto the couch, ready to let the day drain away. That's when I saw it. On the coffee table, centered perfectly on a coaster, was a mug of tea. Steam curled from its surface in lazy, fragrant spirals. I hadn't made tea. I sat up, every muscle instantly tense. The apartment was locked. The deadbolt had turned with its familiar, heavy click. Nothing was out of place. The books were stacked neatly. The remote was on the armrest. The evening sun slanted across the floorboards exactly as it should. Everything was normal, except for the tea. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Had I made it in some fugue state before work? No, It was freshly steaming. The scent was unmistakable. Chamomile, my favorite. I stood slowly, my heart beginning a frantic drum against my ribs. I grabbed a heavy hardback from the shelf, holding it like a club, and began a silent, deliberate sweep of my own home. The bedroom was pristine, the comforter smooth. The bathroom was empty, the shower curtain pulled back to reveal a dry tub. The kitchen was spotless, but when I touched the electric kettle, its metal surface was warm. A prickle of fear traced its way down my spine. I checked every cabinet, the pantry, even the narrow space under the sink. Nothing. I returned to the living room and stared at the mug. A small ring of condensation had formed around its base. I leaned in and inhaled, just chamomile, the same brand from my own pantry. The familiarity of it was more terrifying than anything else. I retrieved my phone from my bag and pulled up the feed from the single security camera I had pointed at my front door. I watched myself arrive, fumble with my keys, and enter. There was no one before me, no one after. The day's footage was a time-lapse of an empty hallway. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin and shaky in the stillness. Only silence answered. I didn't drink the tea. I poured it down the kitchen sink, watching the pale liquid swirl away. Then spent the next hour reinforcing every entry point, finally jamming a chair under the front door handle before attempting a fitful, anxious sleep. The next day was normal. I checked the locks twice before leaving. My landlord confirmed I was the only tenant with a key. I tried to convince myself it was a bizarre, one-time stress-related event. But when I returned that evening, it was waiting for me again. This time it was peppermint tea, my second favorite. The kettle was still warm. A cold dread washed over me. I dropped my bag, backed out of the apartment, and called my friend, Maya. I made up an excuse about a burst pipe and stayed at her place. The image of that steaming mug burned into my mind. The following morning, I returned for clothes. The mug was gone. Not just emptied, but washed and dried, sitting neatly in the cabinet with the others. I hadn't washed the first one. My hands trembled as I opened drawers. Everything was in its place, but it felt curated. Too orderly. I called the police. They did a walkthrough, asked if anything was stolen, and left with a sympathetic shrug. Get some indoor cameras, one officer suggested. I did. I installed small, discreet cameras in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. That night, I stayed with Maya again. In the morning, I reviewed the footage with a dry mouth and a pounding heart. The footage showed me leaving and locking the door. Then, nothing. No movement. No sound. But in the living room camera, the footage glitched. One frame, the coffee table, was empty. The next frame, a full mug of tea was there, steaming.
No one had entered the frame. It was as if reality had simply skipped a beat. I showed Naya. She looked concerned, searching for a rational explanation. Maybe you're sleepwalking? She ventured gently. How could I sleepwalk into a locked apartment I wasn't even in? I countered, my voice rising with a note of hysteria she couldn't soothe. Determined to confront this, I went back that night. I armed myself with a baseball bat, kept every light blazing, and set the cameras to stream live to my phone. I fought to stay awake, but exhaustion finally pulled me under for a few minutes, around 3 a.m. I jerked awake. The tea was there. Earl Grey this time, still warm. I stared at the live feed on my phone. It showed an empty room. No one had come in. A wave of furious, helpless terror broke over me. I snatched the mug and hurled it against the wall. It exploded in a shower of ceramic and brown liquid. I sank to the floor, breathing in ragged gasps, surrounded by the shattered evidence. The next morning, the wall was clean. The broken pieces were gone. And in the sink, the mug sat whole and unblemished, as if it had never been touched. I screamed. The sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence. Desperate for communication, I started leaving notes. "Who are you?" I wrote on a piece of paper, taping it to the table. The next day, a new note appeared beside it, written in a delicate, elegant cursive I didn't recognize. "You looked tired. I thought you might need something warm." I recoiled from the paper. I never saw anyone, never heard a thing, but I began to feel the presence constantly. Not as a threat, but as a quiet, observant companion. I started speaking to the empty air. "Why are you doing this? Are you a ghost?" Sometimes it would be empty in the morning. Sometimes it remained full. I began whispering "thank you" into the stillness. This bizarre ritual became my new normal. The presence knew my routines, my hidden stresses. On difficult days, the tea was sweeter. On cold nights, it was heavily spiced. The notes continued, offering small, intimate observations. "I like the music you played," or "please don't leave the light off in the hallway." I complied. I stopped feeling afraid and started feeling cared for. The invisible company was a comfort against my loneliness. Then, one morning, everything shattered. I was woken not by my alarm, but by the acrid smell of burned tea. It was thick and bitter, clinging to the back of my throat. In the kitchen, the mug lay in pieces on the floor, scattered as if thrown in a rage. The kettle was cold. Beside the shattered ceramic was a crumpled note. The handwriting was no longer elegant and calm. It was a frantic, jagged scrawl. "He found me." The air in the apartment felt different. Heavier, colder, tainted. The gentle presence I had grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of violation and dread. I whispered into the oppressive silence, "Are you still here?" There was no answer. That night, for the first time in weeks, no tea appeared. I sat alone in the living room, the comfort I had known, now twisted into a cold, watchful fear.
The entity that had cared for me was gone, and the silence it left behind was filled with a terrifying new question. Who or what had found it? And were they now looking for me? Story 20. I'm a 24-year-old guy living in a quiet suburb of San Diego. Last year, out of a combination of boredom and curiosity, I decided to give Tinder a serious try. My previous forays into online dating on other apps had mostly resulted in conversations with bots or scammers, so my expectations were low. But one slow Friday afternoon, I downloaded the app, created a profile, and started swiping. To my surprise, I got a match within half an hour of closing the app. For context, I'm bisexual, though I don't love labels. My match was with a guy named Jason. His profile said he was 26, and he was undeniably attractive, well-groomed, a nice smile, and he listed interests in PC gaming and software development, which mirrored my own. Before I could even type a hey, a message from him popped up. Hey there, saw you're new to Tinder. Thought I'd break the ice and say hello. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our favorite RPGs, sci-fi movies, and our experiences learning to code. He told me he worked as a freelance developer, making a great salary while only working 4 hours a day. It was impressive. After about an hour of rapid-fire messaging, he floated the idea of hanging out. I'm down to chill if you are, he wrote, feeling a rare spark of connection. I made a decision I normally wouldn't. I was home alone in my small house, and he mentioned he lived with his parents, so I offered to host. You could come over here. We can game on my PC. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. That sounds awesome. I'll head over in about an hour. We agreed, and I spent the next hour tidying my living room and setting up my gaming rig. A nervous excitement buzzing in my chest. I knew inviting a stranger over was a risk, but he seemed so normal, so harmless. We hadn't discussed alcohol, but I was a casual wine drinker. The bizarre part was the brand. It was my absolute favorite, a specific California Cabernet that wasn't exactly mainstream. I opened the door, trying to seem casual. Hey, you found the place. Easy enough, he said, handing me the bottle. I brought this. Hope you like red. This is actually my favorite brand, I said, a slight unease creeping into my voice. You a mind reader or something? He just laughed, a little too smoothly. Nah, you just strike me as a guy with good taste. I pushed my suspicion aside, chalking it up to a lucky guess. I asked how he planned to get home if we drank, and he casually mentioned he'd taken an Uber. We ended up on my back patio, sharing a glass of wine as we talked more about our lives, our work, and our experiences coming out. For a while, it felt genuinely good, normal. We moved inside to game, and we had a great time. Our competitive banter feeling easy and natural. He showed me some of his coding projects on his laptop, and I was genuinely impressed. The vibe was perfect. Then, I needed to use the restroom. I excused myself and stepped in, not bothering to lock the door behind me. A foolish oversight I would instantly regret. Mid-stream, the doorknob turned. The door swung open, and Jason stepped inside. Before I could even react, he was behind me, his body pressing against my back, his hands gripping my shoulders tightly. He started grinding against me. I shoved him off, hard, stumbling back. My heart was hammering. Whoa, dude. That's a bit intrusive, don't you think? I tried to play it off as a joke, to de-escalate the situation. But my voice was tight. He just stood there, that same easy smile on his face. I just wanted to see how you'd react. Feeling deeply unsettled, I walked quickly out of the bathroom and into the kitchen, with him following close behind. I needed to create space, to reestablish some control. "Do you want some water or something?" I asked, moving toward the fridge. Before my hand could touch the refrigerator handle, he was on me again. He pushed his body against mine, pinning me to the appliance, and his hands groped me over my clothes. This time, his smile was different, wider, unnerving, and utterly creepy. This was no longer a misread signal. This was an assault. I shoved him back with all my strength, my voice dropping to a low, angry growl. "Get the hell off me. We just met. This is not okay." The pleasant facade vanished from his face. "This is a waste of time," he sneered. "You have no idea what you're doing. You give gays a bad name. You're being homophobic." The accusation was so absurd, it almost stunned me into silence. "If I was homophobic, I wouldn't have invited you into my home," I shot back. "I told you I found you attractive, but you are crossing major boundaries right now." He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "In the LGBTQ community, there are no boundaries. It's about being free." And then, just like that, he said, "I have to go." Relief washed over me. I walked him to the front door, and he left without another word, not even a backward glance. I locked the door, my hands shaking. I just wanted to wash the entire encounter off me. I headed to the bathroom for a shower, trying to process what had just happened. About 5 minutes into my shower, I heard a faint tink, tink sound. I stopped, listening. There it was again, a soft, metallic scraping against the bathroom door. Cautiously, I peered through the crack between the shower curtain and the wall, looking down toward the floor. My blood ran cold. There was Jason, crouched on the floor outside the bathroom. He had slid a spoon under the gap at the bottom of the door and was staring directly at me through the opening, a single, unblinking eye visible in the shadow. The door was slightly raised from the floor, just enough for him to see in. My mind raced. I didn't know what to do. Deciding not to alert him, I pretended I hadn't noticed. I slowly turned off the water, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I grabbed a towel, wrapped it tightly around my waist, and prepared to yank the door open and confront him. But just as my hand touched the doorknob,
I heard the unmistakable click whir of a smartphone camera. He had taken a picture. I flung the door open with enough force to slam it against the wall. Jason scrambled to his feet and bolted down the hall. I chased him, but he was faster, darting out my still unlocked front door and sprinting across my lawn. I watched, frozen in my doorway, as he jumped into a white Honda Civic, parked a few houses down, and sped off. He had lied about the Uber. I stood there, towel-clad and trembling, the cool evening air doing nothing to calm the heat of my panic. What had he taken a picture of? Why? The possibilities were all terrifying. I immediately blocked him on Tinder and spent the next few weeks in a state of high alert, paranoid that he would return. Thankfully, he never did. But the violation lingered. The forced intimacy, the creepy smile, and the final chilling image of his eye staring at me from under the door. A moment of my privacy stolen and captured in a photo I would never see. To those who wander in the shadows until the final whisper, thank you. Thank you for allowing my words to be the quiet voice in the stillness of your night. There's a strange and beautiful magic in the way we choose to explore the darkness together, isn't there? A silent pact between storyteller and listener, bound by a shared curiosity for what lies just beyond the light. I hope the tales we unraveled tonight found a home in your imagination. I hope they provided that perfect, haunting shiver, the kind that reminds you you're thrillingly alive. This shared space exists because of you. Your presence transforms these narratives from mere stories into a collective, whispered experience. I will return when the clock next chimes this late hour, carrying new secrets to share. I would be honored if you chose to meet me here again. Until then, may your rest be deep and your dreams be gentle. Should any shadow from our stories linger at the edge of your sleep, greet it not with fear, but with the quiet knowledge that it cannot follow you into the dawn. You are safe. The night is long, but it always breaks. Until we meet again in the quiet, pleasant dreams.